Hello, Garland Nixon here, and Soledar has fallen, and things are starting to look kind of bleak for the Banderites. The question is, what will their sponsors do? Let's talk. Hello there, Kinky and Chicken Patty and everyone. Great to see you hanging out on in the chat room on the live stream as always. So, this has always been the big question. In fact, one of my favorite guys, Andrei Martinyov. He's a really funny guy, and he has that Russian dry sense of humor. And he made a video. I think it was called like the big question or the only question, and that is, do we make it through 2023 alive? And here's the bottom line. You know what I always say, philosophically speaking, I don't know that I'm going to make it through this video alive. So, I don't know how many people. I always think back to 1991 when Magic Johnson came out and said, I've gotten the AIDS virus, right? And everybody was like, oh, Magic Johnson has the AIDS virus. He's a goner. He's out of here. He's done. He's history, right? And that's a long time ago. And a lot of people that felt bad and thought Magic Johnson was a goner. He's still around. They're gone. So do any of us know when we leave this mortal plane? The answer is no. Now, so what's the point of worrying about that? Am I going to go out in a nuclear holocaust? Am I going to get, torn to shreds by pit bulls? Am I going to slip on a banana peel? There used to be this show called 1,000 Ways to Die, and people would do things like pee on an electric fence or something, right? So, who knows? Who knows? A guy got run over by a dead guy. Literally, he robbed the store. And there was an old guy who had like an old 1940s car, the collector's car, that every day he went for a ride. He got in the car, he took the parking brake off. He had a heart attack and died, and the car started rolling down the hill with a dead driver. Well, this guy's robbing a liquor store or some kind of a convenience store. He's backing out saying, all right, nobody move. And he backs out into the street, right over top of him, run over by a dead guy. How ironic is that? And so they both left this mortal plane at the same time. So the issue of nuclear war to me is a moot point. And again, I don't think it's going to happen. Well, not now anyway, but let's move on and let's talk about this. Here's the question. Will the U.S. put boots on the ground? That's the thing about it. Boots on the ground. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about this. What we would be talking about if NATO/US decided we're going to go into Ukraine would mean a land war with Russia. Let's start here. There has been a common theme throughout the conversation from the leaders of Germany, if you've been paying attention to this, of European countries. A while back, Olaf Scholz said, I'm not starting World War III. Macron has said, look, we don't want a war with Russia, right? Recently, Joe Biden was doing something. I forgot. He was talking with somebody. No, I tell you what it was. I think it was after he was talking with the African leaders, some African leaders. And he came out, and people will remember because at the end of the speech, he said, I've already said too much, probably, right? But one of the things that he said was, I've spent hundreds of hours talking to European leaders and keeping them solid. And I did a video where I talked about that. And I said, well, that's telling right there. If he said he's spent hundreds of hours, now Joe Biden can be a little confused. Might have been an hour. Damn, it seemed like hundreds of hours. So I said, might have seemed like 1 hour. But, Joe Biden's, a little rough around the edges when it comes to actually, remembering how long he talked. So hundreds of hours for Joe Biden. But what was he really saying? I've spent a lot of time convincing these people to stay on. He says, and one thing for sure, they do not want to go to war with Russia. My European allies don't want to go to war with Russia. He did somebody wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. In that op-ed, it said, we don't want to go to war with Russia. There's been a common theme, and I've said this all along. Look, the oligarchs don't want to lose everything. They're too rich. if you think about the oligarchs, right? What do they want? They want this transhumanism thing. They want to be able to transfer their consciousness into some kind of computer so they can live forever because they're so rich. And then once they get an android body perfected, then they can take it. That's really their plan. They're so rich and they got it so good. They want to take their consciousness and basically put it in a computer. They want to be the person in the machine, the ghost in the machine. And then they want to at some point build a real live android, and they want to boom right back in, or maybe use DNA to recreate their body, a body that can, overcome age, things of that nature. And what do you know, or maybe do that over and over. Whatever the bottom line is, what are they trying to accomplish? They want to live forever. Now, think about that. If you want to live forever, as Clint Eastwood said in The Outlaw Josie Wales, dying ain't no way to make a living. The one thing that the oligarchs don't want, and let's face it, Joe Biden ain't making these decisions, right? He's not making these decisions. The one thing that the oligarchs, it's like you can do whatever you want. Don't get us killed, because we're trying to live forever. We can't go to the beach in the Maldives hanging out with the honeys, or God only knows, and we might not want to know with like us, it'd be like the Maldives hanging out with the honeys. With them, it's like Epstein's Island. We'll leave that one alone, right? Yikes. But whatever the case, you get the picture. They ain't trying to die. So I'm saying, they're saying to Biden, he keeps repeating, they're saying to him, you got a long leash, but don't you get us killed. You got a long leash, don't get us killed. So I don't see and add to this, that recurring theme. He has made it clear to us. The leaders in Europe have said to him, listen, we don't want a land war we don't want a World War III. We don't want a land war with Russia. We're living good. We, and I mean the elite ruling class, are living good. Now the plebes, things are kind of expensive for them. They're kind of shivering. We're telling them, hey, turn the lights down and stick it to Putin. Literally, they're saying things like, yeah, turn your lights off overnight. Literally, the Prime Minister of Italy literally told the people of Italy, hey, you know what, you guys, if you would turn your lights down at night and turn your heat down and freeze and shiver, that'd symbolically stick it to Putin. Now, understand, they ain't symbolically sticking it to nobody. If you remember the lockdowns, what happened? Lockdown, everybody. Don't move. Don't come out of your houses. Stay in the house. Everybody's got to stay alive. And what they find out in Britain, one guy, he's like married and he's out, shagging his girlfriend on the side. Boris Johnson and these guys, they're kicking it up, hooping and hollering. They're drinking, they're dancing and partying. And the rest of the Britons are like locked in their house, can't even go walk their dogs, for God's sake, right? So let's face it, they like to have their fun. They don't like for us to have our fun. They like to lock us in the house. They like to shut our mouths. They like us to be hungry and starving and desperate, but they like to have a lot of fun. And that doesn't work real good if World War III is going on. So they don't want World War III for one reason. Let's look at another thing, though. You have to look at what the U.S. military has become, because there is no NATO. There ain't nothing. There's the U.S. military. Right now, if Biden were to call over and say, all right, that's it, guys, we're going in. We're going to go to war with Russia, right? And called. First of all, am I mistaken, or were the leaders of Europe the last couple months complaining because they're running out of stuff? Even the Americans were complaining. The Pentagon was complaining. Guys, they're blowing stuff up faster than we can make it. We're running, and we don't have any stuff in case we would get into a war. We can't even defend ourselves. And God knows the people in like the European leaders are like, we're running short. They're like sending them the oldest stuff they can get. They're yanking stuff out of museums. They're calling around the world, calling Algeria, Morocco, anybody they can, any place they can to buy stuff right now. If you got some old Soviet crap that doesn't work and you're like Morocco, you can make a mint. Call the U.S. Hey, I got a dozen tanks. Looks like they were made in 1950 something or other. They got a lot of rust on them, but yeah, come get them. Oh, by the way, 500,000 each. I mean, they're like good for scrap metal. You know what they're going to do? They were going to melt them down for scrap metal, but now they got a sucker. Hey guys, we got a bunch of tanks. Do they run? I mean, what do you mean by run? Could they be hooked up to something that had an engine and dragged in the direction of a battle? Theoretically. I mean, the tracks don't really turn anymore, but come get them. I'll tell you what we'll do. 450,000 each, they're yours. So, they're taking all these countries are taking the US to the cleaner, selling old crap that they couldn't get rid of if you put a gun to their head, right? And they're selling it and they're shipping it over and flopping it off a boat into Ukraine some damn where, or train or whatever, anything they can get their hands on. And because they don't care, because here's what they know. Put some Ukrainian soldiers in it, send them out. If it runs just long enough to get to the front, what difference does it make? They're going to get blown to hell soon anyway. They know they ain't going to be live long inside of it. It is a casket they're putting them in. So they're like, put it in. They probably only give them figure out how many kilometers it takes to get to the front, and that's how much fuel they give them. It's like, okay, what do we got? 40 kilometers to the front. Give them 39 kilometers. Not even enough to get to the front. Yeah, the Russians will sight them in and tear them to shreds with artillery before they get a mile within the front. So let's not waste any fuel on these guys. Next, tank crew. Here's your tank. And of course, the Ukrainians are like, hey, wait a minute. What? And they throw them in there. All right, next guys, give them, there's a priest standing next to there, giving them their last rites, doing this. Okay, dominus, blah, blah, blah. Off you go, suckers. More artillery bait, off they go. And they get blown to bits, and then there's more tanks. Meanwhile, the Germans, the French, they're just about out. They're calling. If Joe Biden literally... Think about this. So they're running out of stuff right now. If Joe Biden was to call Olaf Scholz, we're going in. Schultz would be like, going in where? We're going into Ukraine to take out the Ruskies. Schultz would be like, well, going into who to take out what? He'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? With what? I got no army. I got no navy. I got 8 planes. What am I supposed to do with this? Really? Biden would be like, hey, just count your tanks. Tell me how many you got. He'd be like, okay, hey guys, how many tanks we got? And Biden would be like, I need about 300. He'd say, well, we got 2. Great, that's 200 tanks. No, I don't think you understand. 2. We got 2. Well, the other one, okay, if we get tracks for the other one, right now, the supply chain's a little slow. We've ordered the tracks from China. So we got 2 tanks. You call it 2.5 because one of them's waiting for the tracks from China. And as soon as they get in, we can give you 3 tanks for the effort. That's it. They got 3 tanks, a handful. Right now, what's going on? Look at what's going on right now. It's like, hey, we're calling out. We need more stuff. Soledar has fallen. And the Brits giving them like, okay, we'll take it back. What are you giving? We got 3 Challenger tanks and a handful of armored personnel carriers from France. And oh man, the Netherlands sent some helmets. They don't have what they need to go up against the Ruskies. They don't have what they need to give to Ukraine to go up against the Ruskies. Do you really? If Biden called, okay, first of all, if the U.S. had the troops, which they don't, how long would it take to muster them? How long would it take? All right, the Ruskies got 500,000 troops hanging out in Ukraine, and that ain't all. Now, let me add this. If the Ruskies all of a sudden thought, the U.S. and NATO's coming in, it would take the U.S. and NATO a year and a half to get 500,000 troops together, right? Well, what do you think the Russians would do? They would mobilize, and they've already said we're going to double to 1.5 million. They would mobilize. So by the time the U.S. got 500,000, they'd have 1.5 million troops. And what have the Russians been planning to do for the last, I don't know how long, ever since they've been Russians? Protect their border from the idiots that every 100 years or so, whether it's the French or the Germans, or in this instance, the idiot Americans with the Ukrainians, every 100 years or so, the idiots from the West decide they got to take the same route up through Ukraine and fight the Russians, and they get their butts kicked and they go home for another 100 years. So the Russians have been planning for that because they know every 100 years or so, the idiots get jumpy and off they go. So they're planned, they got missiles, they've got tanks. So if you're thinking about building up a force to go into Ukraine, the Russians have been thinking about building up a force to go into Ukraine for the last 8 years, and now they got a force in Ukraine. So let's be honest about this. And the Russians are pumping out train. They have turned up the dial on their industrial complex. I don't know if you go on Telegram channel, train loads of tanks, armored personnel carriers, all kinds of those what is it? Self-propelled guns, and let's not forget they have almost a limitless supply of like those self-propelled, the old artilleries, which they still use, old school artillery from the Soviet era. Unlimited supplies of these things, right? So they ain't running out of stuff anytime soon. The Russians are not running out of hardware. The Russians are set. Think about this. They have the hardware, the training, and the personnel to fight in the climate and terrain on their border. They've trained to fight in that climate and that terrain. They've equipped their troops. They've built their hardware to work in that terrain. It's cold and muddy and things like that of that nature. So they have built their hardware and everything to work in cold and muddy areas, right? The people live in cold, muddy areas. Everything about the Russian border and the Russian military matches up just nicely. So if you want to fight the Russians, going to their border would not be the place you'd want to fight them. You'd want to fight them in Schenectady. That'd be a good place to. Ottawa, maybe. That'd work. Reykjavik. Try Reykjavik, or maybe the deserts of Saudi Arabia. But on the Russian border, not a good idea. They got missiles way back. They can fire. They're planned from firing all these missiles in their airspace. You go to their border, missiles rain down on you, and you get the living crap blown out of you. Not a good idea. That ain't where you don't want to go to the spider's lair to fight the spider. So think about this. The U.S. is 5, 6, 7, 8,000 miles away, whatever. Let's say 6,000 miles away, 5,000 miles away. We'll just use a number. Our supply lines would be 5,000 miles long, and theirs would be 1 millimeter long because they're already home. So if I know that, I'm pretty sure that the generals in NATO and at the Pentagon know that. The idea that the US and NATO at this point want to fight the Russians in a ground war in Ukraine is patently absurd. So what have they done? Think about what happened. There was a time, say back up into the 1980s, where the US and NATO had a significant ground force in Europe and throughout Eastern Europe, heading towards Eastern Europe, where they could have fought the Soviets. Who knows? At that time, it's not even known whether they'd have beaten the Soviets. The Soviets had a lot of men and material, and you know what I mean? The Russians ain't easy to beat on the ground. So even when NATO had its best force, who knows whether or not they could have defeated the Soviets on the ground. They might have very well lost. And a lot of people felt that they would have lost. The Red Army was huge and vicious. They were big and they were tough fighters, and they had a lot of 20,000 tanks or something. So did you really want that fight? No. Nobody is. I mean, when's the last time that somebody fought the Russians on the ground and won? Not that I can remember any time lately. I'll just throw that out there. So you got a U.S. who late 1990s, they started feeling nobody can screw with us. So they start turning down the dial on their land war forces, right? 2000 comes and they start going to, oh, this is easy. We're in Middle East. It's open area. You can see everything. It's flat. We'll just fly over everything with missiles and we'll bomb easy targets. They have no anti-aircraft, hardware. We just fly over at will. We've got full control of the skies. We'll bomb anything we want. We'll make all of this stuff that's set to fight an enemy that's technologically and numerically inferior. We can fly over them, we can bomb them, piece of cake. And let's face it, you're fighting Afghanistan. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have electronic jamming. They didn't have any of that. You just fly over them and drop a bomb on them. Now, um, they had a lot of terrain. They could take advantage of what they had, but technologically speaking, they were no match for us. So that's what the U.S. did. It flew over Africa. It bombed Africans. It flew over brown and people and it Muslim people, and it just bombed them at will because they could get away with it and nobody could do anything because they were too powerful. So that's what the U.S. See, that created a weakness. When I was a kid, my thing was basketball. I loved to play basketball, right? And here's what I learned. If you play with people that aren't better than you, you're not going to get better. I got into pool for years. I played pool, man. I played, and I would go, to pool halls and bars. Oh, I had so much fun. Pools, people know it's a fun game, and you get competitive. You go to the pool hall, and you want to get better and better, and you go and you start winning some, and then you go somewhere and somebody kicks your ass. You miss one, and they run the table on you over and over again. But that makes you better, doesn't it? Why? Because you now know if you miss one, you're done, and you really focus and concentrate because there's no room for error. Playing pool or any sport or whatever with someone better than you makes you better. Playing with someone worse than you makes you worse because it's too easy. The U.S. has been playing with non-peer competitors for the last 20 years, and it hasn't helped. And the U.S. got cocky and arrogant. That's why we sent all of these mercenaries were ready to go over there, right? These mercenaries were ready to go to Ukraine because they were accustomed to going to Afghanistan. They sit off somewhere, they plink, plink, plink at guys from the distance. They fly over them, they machine gun them from helicopter gunships, and then they go home. It's a video game to them. Now they came to Ukraine, and you've read about some of them. They go to Ukraine, and they come back, they go, holy sweet mother of God. All they did was rain down missiles and artillery on us all day long. If we called on our cell phones, they targeted our cell phones and blew the hell out of us. We're out of here. A whole lot of mercenaries went to Ukraine and very quickly recognized they weren't in Afghanistan anymore and got their asses out of there and went home. And some of them went home in a box. A whole lot of them went home in a box, because they thought they were going to go there to fight this inferior enemy. And little did they know they were up against a superpower military, and they found out the hard way. And the Russians are tough fighters. The Russians are hard fighters, man. History tells us they pride themselves in being tough fighters as a society. And when they go to war, they're ready. They come to fight. So here's my point. I say all that to say this. The U.S., and I think they know, they are not in any way, shape, or form prepared for a ground war with Russia. They're not prepared to send troops into Russia. A lot of people are saying they'll escalate. Okay, it's just for the sake of argument. Just for the sake of argument. The U.S., NATO has 40,000 troops on the borders of somewhere around the border of Ukraine. So NATO says we're sending 40,000 troops into Ukraine. Well, you're in the battlefield now, number one. And number two, if you get killed, it doesn't trigger Article 5. And keep in mind something. Article 5 does not automatically mean that if Russia attacks one of the NATO countries, that they automatically, all of them come in. It means that they can consider it, that they must think about it, they must talk about it. Okay, but because technically Ukraine is not a NATO country, if Poland or any other country goes into Ukraine and starts fighting, if Russia doesn't fire missiles out to Poland and attack Poland, it don't trigger Article 5, right? So let's just say whoever, we've got these mishmash of troops, 40,000 troops, and they go into Ukraine. And Russia rains holy hell on them, hypersonic missiles and Iskanders, and they just boom, boom, boom. I mean, they hit them with everything they got, and I think they would. They hit them hard, and they get heavy, heavy, heavy losses. The people in these home countries ain't going to be happy. They are not going to be happy. What's going on now is, as time goes on, that's why I say the time is on the Russian side. As time goes on, the support for the war is dwindling. It ain't going up. It's waning. It's hit its apex early, and it's heading down, 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 down. The longer the Russians keep this thing going on, the more difficult it will be for NATO to get involved, because the less thrilled their people will be about their country, they're about getting involved, number one. And let's not forget what I said at the beginning. The European leaders have made it very clear that they have a red line. They've made it it's obvious based on the things that Biden have said, based on what Schultz and Macron have said. They, not so much the Brits, because they're just going to, they consider themselves an extension of the U.S. empire, right? Whereas it's clear now that France and Germany and Italy are prisoners of the U.S. empire. They're not part of NATO. They're prisoners of NATO, right? So now they're like, guys, we don't want to do this. And that's the red line. We're going to have to, it's obvious that the U.S. has been told by the Frances and Germanys of the world, that's the Greece especially, that's the red line. Turkey also, that's the red line. And keep in mind something, Turkey is the second largest land army in NATO behind the United States. They got 700,000 troops, but the United States doesn't have them in that area. So Turkey is it. And Turkey is clearly out of this thing. Turkey is clearly done with this thing. And, to muster up the kind of troops that they're going to need to start World War III and to go into Ukraine will be no easy task. Number one. Number two, the only schmucks they could get that would be stupid enough to do it may be Poland. Right? And if Poland does it, they're out on a limb. When they go in, they're going to get blasted. And when and if they go in, clearly the U.S. ain't in. The U.S. ain't going to help them. They're going to go in, they're going to get their butts torn to pieces, and the U.S. is going to be like, yeah, ooh. They're going to be like, hey, go in, guys. Go get them. Sick them, Poles. Sick them. We said we were going to fight to the last Ukrainians, and wouldn't you know it, we're out of Ukrainians. Poles, go get them. The Poles are going to be like, yes, we're going in and we're getting them. And then the United States is going to be right behind us. And we're going to go in. And boy, first of all, the Belarusians have made it clear that's a red line for them. If the Poles are going to come in, they're right there on the Belarusian border. The Belarusians and the Russians are coming in there together. And they're going to hit those Poles probably from two sides. And I would suspect, if you remember something, and I think this was directed at the Poles, a while back, Vladimir Putin said, if somebody decides that they're going to interfere, they'll be hit, in ways that they've never been hit before. They'll be hitting faster and more powerful than they've ever been hit before. What he was saying was clear. If somebody comes in Ukraine and they want to fight, we're going to make an example out of them. So nobody else wants to get what they've gotten. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, again, I always talk about self-defense. There's a bunch of 3 or 4 bad guys around. Oh, we're going to kick you. We're going to beat you up. We're going to do this or that. And the guy's like, I don't want any trouble. I don't want any trouble. And one of them gets on his film. I'm going to kick you. What does the guy want to do? He wants to make an example of the first guy, so the other 3 walk away, because he doesn't want to fight 4 guys. And the first guy comes up. I don't want any trouble. And the guy grabs him, and he grabs that guy's pow, and he snaps his. Then around comes an elbow and he breaks his jaw. And then his hand comes back around with a hammer fist. Pow, breaks the other jaw. And he just gives it to him, right? Whap, 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 whap. A knee comes up to the groin. It takes him down, stomps in the head. The guy's just laying there in a bloody pulp, and he looks up. The rest of the guys are going to be like, oh, man, ooh, that's going to leave a mark. Hey, come to think of it, guys, I don't know about you, but I got to get home. I hear my wife calling me. It's time. My son's got a basketball game tonight. I'm kind of busy. Toodles. He's gone. When he sees his buddy, there's 4 guys. They're going to beat this guy up. And the first guy that steps up gets his jaw broken, his eyes poked, his wrist broken, his groin kneed. I mean, he just get thrown on the floor, stomped mercilessly, ribs broken. And the other guys are going to walk away and say, yeah, that doesn't look like that probably would be in our best interest to fool with this guy right now. Not a good idea. Let's take our buddy here and we'll get him to the emergency room and we'll figure this thing out later, right? That's the Poles. I think the Russians would and the Belarusians would come down on the Poles like a ton of bricks to make sure that everybody looked at the Poles and said, "Go get them, Poles." And when the Poles came in, and and they saw the lights, the night skies light up like on the horizon, and they look, where are the Poles? They're that way. And then when they looked, and all they saw was boom, 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 for hours and hours and hours. At some point they'd be like, that probably wasn't a good idea. Hey, Russians, could you give us a few minutes? Can you give us a little extra time to clean the bodies up and clear the wounded out? And maybe perhaps we can discuss how we can resolve this thing in a more amicable manner. That's what I think the Russians would plan on doing, hitting themselves. Remember, Putin is a martial artist. That's how a martial artist would think. So my point is, the most they may do is send the Poles in, and God save the Poles if they send them in, because they'll get an example made out of them. And then the Poles will pick up the phone and call the U.S. We knew it. We sent guys in and they attacked them with everything they got. When are you going to be here? And the U.S. would be like, well, by be here, I mean, maybe not in physical form. Spiritually, we support you in every way. Symbolically, we're flying our flags at half mast. Understood you lost 25,000 guys in one night. Half mast, the flags at the embassy, the Polish embassy, all of our bases in Poland, they're all flying their flags at half mast. When the bodies come back, we'll salute them, things of that nature. But as far as actually sending our guys into that meat grinder, we're probably going to have to work on that for a while and get back to you in 4 or 5 months once we've, had some meetings and put together some committees to talk about it. Right now, probably doesn't look like the option we're going with. Maybe in the future, the far distant future, we'll consider it. But right now, ain't happening. The Poles would simply be the wood chipper, the meat grinder is empty, and hey, meat grinders got to grind meat. In you go. We're out of Ukrainian meat. Time for Polish meat. That's what could happen with the Poles. Let's hope it doesn't, for the Poles' sake. But then again, you've probably heard of the Darwin Awards. If you are that stupid, if you're stupid enough to pee on an electric fence and you get electrocuted, it was just your time to go. It was just your time to go. If there's certain things that you can do that are so stupid that if it cost you your life, one could interpret that as the universe saying, it's time for you to leave. It's time to move on. You've done everything you need to do here. And your lack of intellect, it's just like the dodo bird, right? There's no dodo birds. Why? Because they didn't have the concept of predators. And when people walked up and the dodo birds were like, hey, what's happening? And unfortunately, humans are predators. They wrung their little stinking necks and they cooked them. But unfortunately, no more dodo birds. We could say, darn, that's really bad if we applied some moral standard to the universe. But in reality, in the universe, there was dodo birds. Now there ain't dodo birds. And now we use the word dodos to refer to people that are stupid. Why? Because I'm not going to say dodo birds were stupid, but the concept that they had of survival was not one that applied in the presence, that should have been applied, or that worked out real well for the dodo birds in the presence of a predatory species. So I'm just saying this to say that about the Poles. As a ethnic group, I'm not insulting the Poles ethnically. We're all human beings. I don't care where you are. Everybody's smart. People are smart. Everybody's smart. Some people are a little sharper than others. However, there's an ideology in Poland, and that's like the ideology in Ukraine, just a little different strain of it. And it's an ideology that says, I hate the Russians to a suicidal level. See, that's what happened in Ukraine. Ukrainians like, I hate the Russians. Really, how much do you hate them? Do you hate them enough to jump in a wood chipper? Yes, I do. Well, the United States is there, and we're going to supply the wood chipper. And if you hate them enough, you may not be intellectually stupid, but ideologically, it will present itself as intellectually stupid. And you're going to jump in the wood chipper. And you know what? In a universe such as the one that we live in, you ought to be in a wood chipper. People that would jump in a wood chipper ought to be in a wood chipper. That's the place for them, right? And so, if the Poles are ideologically, look at what they're doing. They're freezing themselves to death. They're wandering around gathering firewood to survive because they hate Russian energy. They hate the Russians so bad. They're putting together 300,000, I don't know, 30,000, 90,000, however many people they're putting together. They're putting together a military to stand up to the Russians. That, my friend, is suicidal. But if in fact the Poles have an ideology that will drive them to those kinds of actions, I'm not going to say there should be less Poles, but the universe is going to say there should be less Poles. I'm going to say there's the right amount of Poles, just like I would say there's the right amount of everything. There's a right amount of Chicagoans, and there's a right amount of Reykjavikians. What do you call people who live in Reykjavik? Reykjavikians? Who knows? Reykjavikites? There's the right amount of them, and there's the right amount of Poles in this universe. And if they decide that they want to meander into Ukraine and stand around and catch hot metal from Russia until there's dramatically fewer of their soldiers, the universe has spoken. Don't hate the universe, my friends. It just does what it does. But the United States does what it does. And what has it done? Let's go on with this. I'm getting too philosophical here, but let's move on. What has the U.S. done? It's built all of these big bases around Russia, right? It's built bases. The bases are to intimidate Russia, to encircle Russia, to have missiles and things like that around Russia, and to, of course, to make money. But we're going to encircle Russia with bases. We're going to frighten and intimidate them. That's something that's symbolic. That's something that's not on the physical plane. To frighten or intimidate you implies that you can be frightened or intimidated. It implies that if the Russians see U.S. bases all around them, that they'll be afraid, and that they'll somehow at some point throw in the towel and put up a white flag or something, right? We're going to build all these bases. We're going to circle the Russians, because what else have they done? They've got bases encircling the Iranians and all around the Middle East. That's where the oil is. Then there's Asia. We got to build lots and lots of bases all around China. We're always encircling people with bases, right? But it implies that encircling these countries with bases will allow us to do what we did in the Middle East, to just fly over these people and drop bombs on them, to just fire missiles at them. See, the United States, let me make this clear, what I'm getting at, has built a standoff military. It's built a standoff military. We fire missiles from afar that hit you. We suppress your anti-aircraft weapons, and then we fly over you and you we bomb you. Why? Because we don't want to send in a bunch of soldiers because they may get chewed up with shrapnel, and because we go toe to toe with you. If we go old school, all the wonder weapons in the world, as you can see right now, ain't going to do you no good. When you got guys on the ground with a rifle, when you got mortars, when you got mines, when you got people running through the woods shooting at each other, that's old school, my friends. That ain't a bunch of bases surrounding people. So the U.S. puts a bunch of bases surrounding Russia. And in reality, what good does it do? Russia's got missiles that can reach U.S. bases. So if a war started, the U.S. would fire a bunch of, let's say it starts day one, and it doesn't go nuclear. The U.S. has all these bases. It's not really set up for a war with Russia. Let's say these bases go taking off and planes are taking off. The Russians have a lot of anti-aircraft stuff. A lot of them are going to get shot down. If the Russians decide that they're going to take their planes off, a lot of them are going to get shot down. But from what we've seen in Ukraine, they probably ain't. So now missiles are exchanged. So the Russians' anti-missile shield will stop some of them, and the U.S.'s anti-missile shield hasn't been working real well, but we'll see. So now the U.S. bases are going to get hit with a bunch of missiles, and they're going to get mangled pretty good. The U.S. has aircraft carriers and ships which are very susceptible to hypersonic missiles. So I don't know how they're going to do. Well, they're going to do if they're in range of hypersonic missiles. So there's a lot of things happening. The bottom line is day one, the Russians take a bloody nose. The U.S. takes a bloody nose. Day two, you got to have some men with rifles on the ground and tanks and armored personnel carriers. You got to have the stuff on the ground to fight a ground war. If the Russians start moving physically on some of those bases, right? Now, what happens day one? All of the missiles are fired, and the Russians are going to take out all of your satellites. You're going to take out theirs, and they're going to take out yours, right? Day one, all of these wonder missiles that you have that work off of satellite, all of these satellites that you have, the spy satellites, and all of these things that you have are gone, because the Russians have the capability to shoot down our satellites. We got this capability to shoot down theirs. So now what happens? You don't have your eyes in the sky. So how can you see what the Russians are doing? You got to fly planes. You got to fly AWACS, things like that. How long are they? What's the lifespan going to be of AWACS and things of that nature if you're at war with the Russia? Hours. They're going to get shot down. Theirs are going to get shot down. Ours are going to get shot down. And what does it come down to then? Troops on the ground. The Russians are going to have 100,000 men moving across here, and you won't. And you won't have satellites, and you won't have AWACS, and you won't know where they're hitting until things start blowing up. And it's World War II all over again. And what are you going to do? Go nuclear? Then you're dead. Everybody's dead. You might as well put the gun in your mouth and shoot you. Again, they don't want to do that. So here's my point. NATO is not set up for a ground war, does not have the personnel, does not have the military hardware to fight Russia. NATO ain't going into Ukraine. They don't have anything to go into Ukraine with. And if they go into Ukraine and the fight gets thick and it starts to move outside of Ukraine, they don't even have what they need to defend themselves from Russia. Russia's the Baltic states will be overrun in no time. And here's the bottom line. If they got in a war, the Russians are not coming out to move across Europe. The Russians are protecting their border. If you're going to get in a fight with Russia, that means you're coming to their border to attack them, because they're sitting at their border. They don't want to go out to Paris. They don't want to move all the way to the English Channel. They're there to protect their border. So if NATO decides we're going to go to war, NATO has to go to Russia's border to fight them. Imagine that. You got to go to them to fight them, because they ain't coming out to fight you. They're fighting a defensive war. And if the war starts tomorrow, they're digging in. Their border will be concrete, rebar, and steel from one end to the other. And they're taking out all your satellites. And so now, if you want to fight Russia, you got to come into that mess. That's suicide. That's suicide. They'd have miles and miles of razor wire. They got steel mills and pill boxes and tank traps and all of that. You know what? And if I may ask you this, and what would be the point? What would be the point? What are you going to try to penetrate all that stuff and lose more people in an hour than you lost in the 2 world wars? And do you really think that if you say to the American people, we're going to war with Russia, it's time to draft 10 million young soldiers to send them over there to go to war with Russia? How do you think that would work out? As divided as America is right now, and as unhappy as people are, do you really think that all the young Americans would go, sign me up? Your country would be torn to shreds. And Europe would be like, oh, hell no, we don't want this fight. I don't see. If the Americans were to try something like that, yeah, I think we're going against the Russians, that'd be it for NATO. It would fall apart. NATO is nothing but an umbrella organization that they use to hold together the European countries. I don't see any way. It's when the European countries have been telling them, this is our red line, we don't want to go to war with Russia. How the U.S. is saying, okay, your red line, you don't want to go to war with Russia. Yeah, we changed our mind. We decided we're going to go to war with Russia. At that point, it ain't going to work. And right now, the German military is losing like 500% more troops than they normally do. People are retiring, walking away, leaving, not re-signing, you name it. Why? Because they're like, I don't want any parts of that crap. You ain't sending me into Ukraine, buddy. I'm out. Do you really think you could suddenly reverse that? All right, guys, here's what we're doing. The Ukrainians over there, yeah, and the Poles, the ones that we kind of really don't like and don't like us, yeah, we're going to war for them. Everybody get together. I want all of your kids, your children, your sons and daughters. We're going to send them over to this friggin' wood chipper and throw them in next so they can all get torn to pieces and yet ripped up in shrapnel. Oh, and by the way, we only got about a week's supply of war material, so we're going to go over there. We're going to fight the Russians. After a week, we're out of ammo. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just do not see it happening. Now, what do I see happening? I think there's a couple of things, options for NATO. One is, and a lot of people think this, to walk the hell away, to just say, well, oh, this didn't work out. We've decided to declare victory. We're just going to kind of chill on this. And we'll start focusing on Taiwan, Iran, other things like that, to just kind of walk away from it, because that's what they normally do. What are their options? There's right now, here's the reality of this. There is no win for NATO. There's no way to win this. This is over. It was always over. You put a proxy army full of schmucks and Nazis and idiots up against the superpower. That was never going to work out in your favor. There was never a time when the Russians were going to lose to the Ukrainians. Yeah, you got the information war and you convinced the mutton heads here in the United States and throughout. You've still got a lot of them who just believe it. They still somehow think the Russians are going to lose and that Soledar and Bakhmut is fallen, but a couple of Challenger tanks and a handful of freaking armored personnel carriers from France are coming in and they're going to turn the tides, right? At some point, they're going to wake up and say, what's going on? Oh, it doesn't look like the Ukrainians are doing real well. Kind of looks like they're losing. What happens now? And the Russians they're in no rush. The Russians are in no hurry. I'm not going to say they're not going to do a big offensive. I wouldn't. I'd continue with small offenses. I'd continue punching them in the mouth. I just continue punching the Ukrainians in the mouth. I would get them where I want them and just punch, hit with medium offensives. I wouldn't have to go with a big one. Right? Why? You don't have to. Now, if the ground freezes and everything is in your favor just right, and you can do a knockout punch if you're the Russians, and you see that knockout punch there, yeah, sure, take it. Take it. It's like anything else. You're fighting a big guy, and the guy turns his chin down. He makes a mistake. Pow! He exposes that chin. Wham! Flat, open hand right here. You get somebody with that, you step into it, and you bam, they will drop. You get somebody, get that chin, buddy. You can drop them like a lumberjack. So you may not be planning on it, but the guy drops his hand, looks the other way, whatever the case may be, and you can put him out. You end it right then. Other than that, you might not have to. It's kind of, if you step in, one thing to remember, when you're punching, if you miss, if you swing and miss, you're vulnerable. Anytime you're swinging, you're vulnerable, right? Anytime you're taking a punch, that's when you're vulnerable. There are a lot of people that like to counter punch. That's when your arm goes out. Somebody can grab that arm and put you in a lock, twist it, do whatever they want to, manipulate it, right? So you don't want to put that arm out. You don't want to throw a punch. You don't want to throw an offensive move unless you're sure and you need to, or you're sure, whatever the case may be, because it's kind of dangerous. It's a risky thing to do. Why take risks? I think the Russians are going, when they see an opportunity, they're going to punch. They're going to continue to grind away. And if they see an opportunity to make an offensive, they're going to do it. But right now, time's on their side. And so along, making some moves, and at some point, if the Ukrainians start to fall apart, this thing starts to collapse. Because right now it is, and everybody, anybody who knows, who really has been studying this conflict and have been studying, really studying it, knows we are getting to a point where soon there's not going to be much of an argument that can even be made anymore by the propagandists. The last several months, there were still Ben Hodges and some people out here saying things like, yes, the Ukrainians, I believe by this summer they can take Crimea, stuff like that. Soon that stuff's going to start to fade away. There's just going to be it's going to be so farcical as it always is, that it's just going to be people hanging their heads saying, "Really, Ben? Really? They're going to take Crimea?" They're running for their stinking lives right now, and they're surrendering, and they're getting chewed to pieces by shrapnel, and you're standing on the sidelines. You ain't the one getting shot at. You ain't the one getting blown to hell. You're not the one getting entire generations wiped out of your country, and you're standing on the sidelines saying, any day Zelensky will be marching into Crimea triumphantly. It's easy for you to say. Why don't you pick up a rifle, Ben Hodges, and you go face the Ruskies in Bakhmut, and then tell us how quickly that the Azov battalion will be marching into Crimea? It ain't going to be anytime soon. I'll put it to you like that. If they go to Crimea, it's going to be cut, because that's where they built the POW bases, and they're going to stick them on POW bases. That's the only way the Ukrainians get to Crimea, is on a bus that's marked POW. Other than that, they ain't getting to Crimea. Not happening. So the bottom line is now, I guess, and what I'm getting at is, for those of you who are asking, will NATO put troops on the ground? Maybe they'll send in the idiot Poles, but the Poles are gearing up. I think what the Poles are really gearing up for is the end is near, and they're hoping there's some kind of a way that they can snag a piece of Western Ukraine, that they see it as in the cards, that Putin has said, I don't want these idiots. I got Eastern Ukraine. Western Ukraine's a bunch of flipping idiots. I don't want them. You can have the Banderites if you want them. Keep them. I don't want them. And I think maybe the Poles are like, at some point, we won't really have to negotiate with them. The Russians will be just like, okay, we've gone as far as we're going. Now, don't get me wrong. The Russians may go all the way to the Polish border. They may just keep going. And they may keep going for this reason. Because they may keep going and say, anywhere we see a platoon, we're wiping them out. We're going to cross the Dnieper River, because they have not destroyed the bridges. And I've thought for a long time, there's a reason they ain't destroying the bridges. And they may come across, and they may say, anything we see that looks remotely like it is a part of the Ukraine military, we're going to turn it to mulch right on across. Either you guys give up as a whole, or we're just going to keep going, and we're just going to keep fighting. In any pocket of resistance that we can find, we're attacking it. I mean, that's possible. As long as there is any, see, the Russians may be looking at it like this, and this is a thought, because if I were leading the Russians, I'd maybe probably thinking like this. Let's say we win the Donbass. As long as there is an organized army, an organized military, I'm attacking it. If they're anywhere, wherever they are, and I'm not attacking it to engage, I'm attacking it to wipe them out. So, okay, we've taken the Donbass. Where is the next concentration of Ukrainian soldiers? Well, they're in this area. Good enough for me. Gentlemen, start your engines and send in the tanks, send in everything, wherever the next concentration of it. Put, if there's 10,000, 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers in a particular area, encircle them with 100,000 soldiers, and just completely, either they give up, or they go to that great Bandera, or they go to meet Bandera. Either they are going to give up now, or they're going to get a first-class meeting with Bandera, and they can discuss what they're going to do with him and whether or not they died a valiant death. If I'm in charge of the Russians, because here's the thing, if I'm in charge, thinking, I'm just saying, I'm not, if I'm thinking like the Russians, I'm thinking, as long as there is a sniff of a Ukrainian military left, the Westerners are going to come in and try to arm it and try to start this thing over again. And as long as I haven't seen a white flag and they haven't come to me and said, okay, we want to work out a deal in Ukraine, I'm still at war. And when they say we want to work out a deal in Ukraine, I'm going to say I'm still at war. But you can talk to me while I'm at war. But you got to give me everything I want, including an unconditional surrender. And everyone in uniform got to give up their gun. And they will not be armed again. Now, you can take that deal. You don't have to. If you don't take the deal, the war goes on. And as long as I see something that looks like Ukrainian military, I'm attacking it. Now I'm just saying, if I'm the Russians and I'm in their military position, that's what I do. I'd be like, look, how do you have any idea how long we've been in Syria? How long the Chechen War went on? We didn't go in this thing to fight for 6 months. We went in this because we said we got Nazis on our border. And the last time we had Nazis on our border, we lost 27 million people. We ain't losing 27 million people this time. They're losing 27 million people this time. We ain't. Or however many people they got, that's how many people they're losing. We ain't losing it this time. When you brought Nazis to our border, you set this up. There was never another direction that this could go in. That's the way I feel the Russians are thinking. You built up this Nazi regime on their border. You set up a situation that couldn't end any other way for a country that lost 27 million people to the Nazis. They looked, well, what do you know? There's Nazis again. You know what we did last time? That's what we're doing this time. And what do the Russians do? When they were attacked by the French, by the French, they didn't stop till they got to Paris. What did they do? You are what your record says you are. What did they do when they were attacked by the Germans? They didn't stop till they end up in Berlin. And they've been attacked as far as they're concerned. As far as they're concerned, they were attacked. Why? Because the days before this war started, the Azov people were shelling nonstop the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass area. From the perspective of the Russians, they were attacked. And they ain't going to stop until the Russians don't usually stop halfway. They end up in your capital. So what's going to happen? I see no way that they don't end up in Kiev. Their history says they end up in the capital. What's the capital? It's Kiev or whatever you want to call it. So where are the Russians most likely to end up? I'm thinking at some point, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But as historically speaking, I think the Russians keep moving all through the Donbass until they've finished everything there. Because what did they do? They went through Eastern Europe in World War II, through town after town, burg after burg, city after city, village after village. And they just kept going and going and going. And then what do you know? There's Berlin. Because if you're Russian, you got attacked from the people in Berlin, right? And if you want to stop the attack, sooner or later, you got to get to Berlin. From their perspective, they were attacked by the people in Kiev. And if you want to stop the attack that was born in Kiev, at some point, you got to end up in Kiev. And the Kiev people, I suspect, are going to move to Lvov. A lot of them already have. They've gone to Lvov, whatever the hell it is. They're there in Western Ukraine. That's still Ukraine. And if Kiev falls, they'll move to there. You think the Russians are going to stop? What does the history tell us that they've done? Did they stop before they got to Paris? Did they stop and make a deal before they got to Berlin? They didn't stop. The only way the Russians stop is if you stop them, and ain't nobody stopped them yet. So maybe I'm wrong. I think they're going to keep going. They're going to keep sweeping across, and as World War II and on, they're going to keep coming. And anything in their way that looks like it's military, they're going to try their best to annihilate it. And they're going to keep going. Oh, what do you know? There's a platoon, wipe it out. There's a division, crush it. There's a brigade, annihilate it. And they're not going to stop, and it's going to be their march to the river. And I don't see, and in that, they ain't slowing up. They ain't slowing up for Ukrainian troops. They ain't slowing up for Azov troops. They ain't slowing up for Polish troops, NATO troops, which ain't coming in. I don't care who, mercenaries. I don't care who you send in. They're going to do what they do, and they're going to keep going and going and going until whatever it is they've gone to, there ain't no further to go. And that could end up Lviv. And people are like, they don't want Western Ukraine. I ain't saying they want Western Ukraine per se to take it and keep it. But I think Maybe they want to make sure that if there are troops in Western Ukraine, that those troops either get the hell out of Western Ukraine and run to another country, or if they stand and fight, then they either win against the Russians or they get defeated and destroyed by the Russians. And once they've done their scorched earth policy to the Russian border, to the border, once you've cleaned everything up, you look around, anything left? Nope. Okay, we can go home now. There's no Ukrainian military left because we killed it. Every bit of it, every piece of it. Now we'll go back. Now, US, now you can come in. Now let's see now that there's nothing but a blackened, scorched pile of ashes, that we have destroyed anything militarily that we could find. Now let's see you come back and rebuild Ukraine into a NATO country. You're going to have to provide all new soldiers, all new military, everything in Western Ukraine, because anything that looks remote like military in Western Ukraine, they're going to blow it to hell. That's what I see happening. Maybe I'm wrong. And I don't see NATO wanting a piece of that. And number one. Number two, meanwhile, NATO, and this is the US's issue. Meanwhile, while this is going on, the US still has to keep barking at Iran. You must do what we tell you to do. They still got Africa Command, right? So they're flying all over Africa. They still got soldiers in Iraq. They still got soldiers in Syria that are starting to get a bomb, that are their existence there is tenuous at best, right? And they're supposedly building all of these bases and all of this stuff in the Pacific, supposedly threatening the Chinese the same way. So they're trying to do all of this other stuff, and they're facing a superpower. That's the way I see it. I don't see him I just don't see him coming. All right, so let's go and let's look. Since I'm tired, I'm going to look at the super chats. Not a lot of super chats, but that's okay. People do super chats when they can. Let us look. And MYR, keep telling the truth, Mr. Nixon, salute you. Well, I don't know. I'm just running off at the freaking mouth, particularly tonight because I'm tired. It seems like Poland is trying to find a reason for which they're reasonably salty towards Ukraine so they can sell a reason to start their idealistic expansion. Yeah, well, all I can say is the Poles may make a dramatic mistake, and if they do, they're going to get their butts kicked flat, and the U.S. ain't coming to help them or anybody else. Here's the dirty little secret. Most of Europe doesn't like the Poles. Most of Western Europe doesn't like the Poles. And, it wouldn't shock me that the Germans, if the Poles got their butts kicked and they got put in their place, that the Germans wouldn't be on the sidelines clapping. Kinky2 says, the New York Times says 1/10/23 that Biden will be bringing Ukrainian Nazi troops to Oklahoma to learn the Patriot missile system. Are we okay with that? The Patriot missile system ain't going to do them no good. What good is the Patriot missile system going to do? Let me give you an example. They used the Patriot missile system to protect the Saudis, and the Yemenis used a bunch of little drones to bomb the living crap out of the Saudi infrastructure. The Patriot missile system is not all it's cracked up to be, my friends. It ain't that great. So it's not going to. And what are they going to? They're going to train them to get to, and then they're going to give them one, which will last literally hours, because the Russians, it'll be like a prize for the Russians to blow it up. So they may waste they may even waste a hypersonic missile on that just to get the prize of blowing it up. Noah Name says, thanks for another night of truth bombs. I don't know. I'm just wandering off. I'm just talking, saying what I think. I don't know if any of it makes any sense or not. Let's see. How about Taint Tostada says, Gen X remembers the Cold War. That is quite correct, my friends. That is quite correct. And let's look. This says, shut up, Garland. I'm 100% Poles. First one in the U.S., but I'm still Poles, so quit hating on them. I'm not hating on the Poles. Nancy, I'm not saying anything bad about the Poles. I'm just saying, as a nation, this is not the ethnicity of the Poles that I'm talking about any more than I talk about any ethnicity. I'm just saying, as a nation, what the hell's up? First of all, let me say this. I'm an American. Can you get stupider than us? Look at American. We're friggin' idiots. Now, I can say it's very stupid of the Poles as a nation to have a superpower next to them and to side with this fascistic country, the United States, from the other side of the world against the superpower that's right next to them, I'm telling you, Nancy, that's really stupid. But look at the superpower that they're siding with, the United States. Look at this place. It is a freaking disaster area. We are run by the stupidest people on earth. I'll say this. I don't care how stupid it is for the Poles to be suicidal working with the United States. The worst part of what they're doing is look at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We are a country that is run by a guy whose brain is addled with dementia, and he's still smarter than the vice president because she's as stupid as a bag of ice. We are a country that's $31 trillion in debt. We are a country, homeless villages, homeless. Think about this. The richest country in the world. We got homeless encampments all over the place. Homeless people wandering aimlessly through the streets. No food, stinking. You get on a bus, one homeless person gets on there. They smell so bad, you can't get off the bus. You got to get on. You get on the, I don't ride buses, but I'm saying you get on the subway in DC and a homeless person gets on, you're like, oh, God, you can't take it. You got to get off. And we're spending like trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions going to Ukraine. So yes, I'm saying the Poles are out of their flipping minds to side with these lunatics against Russia, and Russia's right next door. I got to say that. But I'm an American, and look at the lunatics that they're siding with. Lunatics. Let me add this to talk about how bad we are. Our number one trading partner is China. Now, not a good idea for the Poles to pick a fight with a superpower next door. That is about as stupid as you can get. But there is something stupider. You have a rich superpower like the United States, rich for the top, 1%. Everybody else is kind of struggling right now. And one of the reasons that you're able to make a lot of money is because of your economic bond to China. And these morons are doing their best to start a war with China. Thank God China is so much smarter than we are as a nation that they won't take the bait and stop and start and attack Taiwan like the US wants them to. But if they would take the bait and do what the United States would want, our economy would disintegrate. It would be ashes overnight. So while I say that Poland as a country is moronic to pick a fight with a superpower next door in alliance with some idiot fascist Nazis in the United States, half a world away, the only stupider people than that are the people in this country. I don't know how much you know about Americans, but all you need to do is turn on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News and watch it for 20 minutes, and you will shoot yourself. You will watch any news program, any news channel in the United States, and you will not live another hour. One of two things. You have to do one of two things. You must either commit suicide immediately, or you must pull your TV off the wall and throw it out the window. Those are the only two options if you watch. So yes, I'm hard on the Poles. It's really stupid what the Poles are doing. But I'm hard on the United States because why would you guys ally with a country? Was there a song once, American Idiot? Why would you ally with a country that's run by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I'll put it like this. The leaders of Poland, Duda, what have you, these guys are ideologues and morons, right? I mean, just ideologues and morons. Yes, they are. But they're still smarter intellectually than Joe Biden. He doesn't even know what the hell he's doing on any given day. He doesn't even really, the guy doesn't, he gives a speech. We have the leader of our country gives a speech and then wanders around the stage for 5 minutes with his hand out, looking for someone his hand to shake. And there's nobody there. There's never anybody there. And at some point, somebody walks up to him. You've seen the videos, and grabs his elbow and directs him to the proper way to leave the stage because he doesn't know how to get off stage. And the only other option, if anything happens to him, is Kamala Harris. And she talks to everybody like they're in first grade. Big countries attack little countries, and we don't want big countries to attack little countries, boys and girls. It is pathetic. So yes, I'm hard on the polls. Sorry about that, Nancy. Nothing personal, but for God's sake, what's up with the polls? But I gotta say, when it comes to just being stupid, everybody's got to take a back seat at this point in the world to the United States, to the country that I live in. Everyone must take a back seat to the United States. All right, let's continue. What happens to the U.S. when imperialism implodes, you think? We're seeing it now. Is it possible to reindustrialize in time to avert widespread devastation? No, you're seeing what happens. You're seeing what happens when it implodes. The question, I think, is, will there be a political turnover? See, one of the problems in the United States is that we don't have a government and we have no democracy. We have a deep state. We have a national security state that has taken control of things. So if they don't like the national security state, don't like the government, then they work the president. Then they work to overthrow the president. If they don't like who may be president, who may possibly become president, then they utilize the media and what have you to attack them. If it's Trump, if it's Tulsi Gabbard, if it's Bernie, if it's me, if it's you, it doesn't matter. If somebody's running for president and the national security state doesn't want them, they're aligned with the media, they attack that person and take them out. So the question is, can the American people overcome the influence and power of the national security state, which has completely taken power here? That's the question. I don't know. We will live to see that, and we'll see what happens. This is not the first. This is not the first empire to fall. This is the first nuclear armed empire to fall. But this is the first empire to fall. So we will see. I understand Nancy. She thinks that I'm hating on polls, and I mean, yeah, sometimes I gotta say, for God's sake, what the hell's up with the polls? Unfortunately, they're about to come. It looks like they want to commit suicide, but of course, look who they're working for. All right, let's go. Somebody says Kamala Harris is a clinical hebephrenic, laughing at everything. Yes, she's just, you got to just signed on, going to start at the beginning, 1 hour back. Keep up the great work. I don't know. When I do these videos, I get to rambling on and I always feel like they're not very good. Rich McGee says, just signed. Thanks a lot, Rich. We got anybody else? Greg says, after brainwashing the people that Putin is Hitler with atomic bombs, how can they back down? World War III seems inevitable. I think it does, because you got to have some people go along with you in World War III. And I don't believe that Western Europe is ready to do that. Great show as always. Thank you. You're making me realize who my real ally should be in spite of being conservative. Prayers for you and thanks. Yeah, right. Thanks a lot. The problem I have in the U.S. Look, can I say something about conservatism real quick? Americans don't know what conservatism means, really. They don't have any idea. Let me give you an example. Americans have lost an understanding of what left and right means. Completely lost an understanding of what left and right means, because the liberals, the neoliberals, right, the ultra liberal fascists have reinterpreted left so that it no longer is associated with economic class, which is what left is associated with. It's about economic class. So now the neoliberals have reinterpreted left in the United States to mean you got a rainbow flag and a BLM mask, symbolic crap. You don't even really support people who are marginalized people, but you give the illusion that you do. And then people say, well, there you go. If you're for trans bathroom bills, that means the left. They don't understand that it doesn't. Let me give you a perfect example. I've been to South America, traveled in South America. That's the left, brother. That's the left. They're Marxists, they're Leninists, they're socialists. You go all through. I mean, Marxism, Leninism, socialism is all over South America, Latin America. Those people, it's in there. You'll talk to them. They are the left. They are socialists. And they say we fight Bolivarian socialism. But wait a minute. Most of those countries, abortion is illegal. They're not into the LGBTQ, all that T stuff. Very religious Catholics. Socially, If you're in America, how could they be the left? They're against abortion. They're against the LGBTQ stuff. They're against the stuff that the neoliberals have redefined the left as in the United States, right? So there are a lot of Latinos in the US from South America who are socialists, but will vote for sometimes for Republicans because they're opposed to what? Abortion. A lot of countries, they ain't much on abortion, and it ain't big on the LGBTQ stuff in South America. Very socially conservative. But the American conservatives don't under that. They're like, hey, they're socialists. So that must mean that they like all of the rainbow flag stuff. No, they don't. They're very socially conservative. Why? Because they are actually the left. The left is about economic class. So they're about economic class. They don't define themselves as lefties and socialists because of social issues. In fact, they are conservative on social issues. They define themselves as lefties and socialists based on economic class issues. So when you say, I'm a conservative, well, you'd be perfectly happy in South America when it comes to issues of social issues. You would be perfectly aligned. You could go to a socialist country and you could go to Venezuela, you could go to Nicaragua, and you would be perfectly well aligned with the people there socially. They would agree with you because they're socially conservative. They may not agree with you on economic issues, on political issues, but Americans don't understand the origins of the left and what the left is in the world and what socialism is in the world, and how socialism does not imply all the rainbow flag things and the cultural things in the United States that the neoliberals use to redefine the left in the United States. So they're socially and culturally conservative, and they're socialists. They are left. Or would you say they're not left? They're socialists. Of course they're left. So they're lefties, far lefties who are socially conservative. So to say I'm a conservative does not mean that you're not saying you're a socialist. You can say I'm very conservative and I'm a socialist, and you would be perfectly fit in South America and a lot of other parts, and in Africa. They go to Africa. The socialists in Africa, the communists in Africa, they're socially conservative. So again, that's a whole nother video. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I am very, very tired. And I see poor old Kathy. I offended her. I probably offended everybody else. I don't know. This person says the left spends your money. That is a understanding of the left in a misunderstanding of the left in the United States and the West. The left spends your money. Well, let's see. What did Ronald Reagan do? Ronald Reagan ran up the deficit more than all presidents combined before he did. What did Trump do? Blew the deficits through the roof. What did George Bush do? Blew the deficits through the roof. Are they the left? Are they the left? The fact of it is that's nothing but talking points. The real problem in America is that Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George Bush, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, they all practice the same ideology, the ideology of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is not left or right. Explain to me how the left spends your money, and the United States is $31 trillion in debt. With a president for 4 to 8 years that's a Republican. The Republicans are in office for a while. The Democrats are in office. The Republicans, the Democrats, and none of them ever thinks that they should do anything about the debt. We're $31 trillion in debt. China is a surplus nation. The left spends your money. China is a surplus nation. China has savings. They are not in debt. So the left spends your money. Was the United States was Reagan a far lefty? Doesn't make sense. Those are talking points for people in America who barely have a superficial understanding of ideology, because these talking points are put upon us. But when we look at the reality and the history, so things are different. Things are very, 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 very different. If we're the right or the center or whatever, and we have a Republicans, we got Republicans for 4 years, Democrats for 4 years, Republicans for 8 years, Democrats back and back and back. And what happens? No matter which party we have in, the so-called right or left, they all drive the deficit to hell. Why? Because they're all neoliberals. Because they're fooling people to think. They'll say to you, the left spends your money, ha ha ha, vote us in, and then they come in and they spend like hell, and they could care less. Right now, do you hear the Republican Party saying we got to cut back? Do you hear McCarthy? There's a handful of people in the Republican Party, 5 maybe, saying we got to cut back. Do you hear McCarthy saying, "Oh my God, this money that we're spending sending to Ukraine and all the way"? No, it ain't going to do it. And you know what? Did Trump say, "Oh my God, we got to stop spending"? No, hell no, he didn't. He cut nothing, spent like hell, every one of them. And what do? There's talking points. They come in and the Republicans say, yes, the Democrats spend your money, put us in. And then the Republicans get in and they spend like hell and run it through. And Americans still use the same talking points. Those talking points are not applicable here. If that was the case, that would mean China, being a communist socialist country, would have to be broke. But for some reason, they're not broke. Why ain't they broke? And in fact, when you look at South America, the only reason those countries are broke is because any of those countries are broke is because the United States sanctions the hell out of them. Anytime they're not sanctioning them, they do very, very well. They got resources and but again, these are talking points in America. So I don't understand. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Anything else that I miss? I might have missed some people because I am tired. Great work, Colin. Thank you. Too many politicians and oligarchs making money from the war. The war is over when the money stops. You are correct. Just signed on. Okay, that's it. I think that's it for everybody. And I'm tired. And I think I've probably said more than I need to say. Persuade to Tron. Nice $20 super sticker. Thank you very much. Anything else? Thanks, Garland, Gonzalo, Lero, Jimmy, Doorbell, Hicks. Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Don't remember the field. I think that's it. All right. Thanks a lot, you guys. I guess I will be back around tomorrow. Don't read my comments. You'll be fired by the deep state. It's interesting that a lot of people ask me about that. Are you worried? Are you afraid you're hurting people's feelings? You're saying this to the wrong person. And this is the way I look at it. You only live once. Say what you got to say. 100 years from now, we'll all be out of here. And just do what you got to do, say what you got to say, live the way you got to live, enjoy every day at a time. One of these days, people will be saying, yes, remember old Garland? He was a good old soul. And it doesn't matter if I slip on a banana peel. It doesn't matter if the Merit Vets people blow me up because I'm on their list. Doesn't matter. One of these days, I'm out of here. But while I am here, I will say this. I've had my fun. Garland Nixon has had his fun. A whole lot of people haven't enjoyed their lives the way I've enjoyed mine, because you can tell it's my attitude, right? I have fun. And so I expect to be around a long time. I got a lot of fishing to do. I got fun stuff to do. I got my John Deere lawn tractor coming in. I'm excited about it. That's a big deal for me, a John Deere lawn tractor. For a guy like me, John Deere, I get firewood, I can pull stuff around with it. I can take the mower deck off, and it's a little cart that I can pull my little cart in the yard around and put firewood in the back of it. Then, of course, it's got a mulcher for leaves and all that. To me, that's like a big buy. That's a big deal. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys looking, saying the same thing. Are you kidding me? You get a John Deere lawnmower? They can't admit that that's, like, for a lot of us guys, that is heaven. I got a John Deere hat I ordered that's coming in next week. Hopefully the same time the lawnmower comes in, my hat will be in. And, I'm just an old country guy. If you get something with John Deere, a steel chainsaw, things like that, those are the things that make us happy. That's what makes our lives worth living. All right. Thanks a lot, you all. As usual, if you can do patreon.com, $3, $5, $100 million a month, whatever you can do. Of course, PayPal is there. Buy Me a Coffee is great. If you don't like PayPal, well, buymeacoffee.com/GarlandNH. Cash App, my info's there. Of course, as always, Rockfin is available. Please, just in case they throw me off of YouTube, make sure you go to Rockfin. Wow, I've been on an hour, darn near an hour and a half. No wonder I'm so tired and rambling aimlessly. Rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. If you get an opportunity and you can join Rockfin, just in case they throw me off YouTube, follow me on Twitter at Garland Nixon. And of course, as I always tell everybody about Rockfin, it's perfectly free. It costs you absolutely nothing. However, Rockfin does not have advertisements. And if you can become a subscriber, it's $9.99 a month. Excuse me, it's $14.99 a month. You join for a year, you get 2 free months, which means it's $9.99 a month. So if you can become a subscriber at Rockfin, that helps keep Rockfin going. That helps keep the channel going if you can afford it. And the only thing you really get from that, but it's worth it, is every Wednesday from 9 to 10, Scott Ritter and I do a 1-hour show, and that's my premium show each week for people who are subscribers. Other than that, everything else is free. So rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. If you can afford it, become a subscriber. If you can't, just become a regular member and you see everything except that 1-hour show. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. I'm out. Anything else? No. I didn't miss any more super chats. Ooh. Metal Max, thanks a lot. Metal Max gave me one super sticker or something. Thanks a lot, you all.